The kick exploded like a gunshot in the middle of an otherwise calm airport. A black leather suitcase flew open, papers and electronic equipment scattering across the polished floor of Gate F-12. Dozens of passengers jolted in unison. It took 1 second to understand what had happened, and another for every throat to tighten. Heather Lawson stood tall, spine straight, chin slightly tilted, as if she had just completed a task she believed was righteous. The LED lights above reflected off her tightly pulled blonde hair, sharpening her face into something cold and rigid. She inhaled, and her lips curved into a chilling, mocking smile. "Stay in your lane," Heather released each word, slowly low and venomous. "First class isn't for people like you." The way she emphasized people like you froze the air. A chill ran through the backs of those nearby. Someone gasped softly. A mother pulled her child closer. A businessman paused mid-sip, eyes widening. 2 college students behind them simply stared at each other, mouths open, unable to speak. In the middle of the chaos, Maya Collins did not move. She stood, tall shoulders, straight eyes, steady. Only her breath faltered for the briefest moment, so small no one else could notice. She looked down at the documents now scattered across the floor. Aircraft safety system, blueprints, prototype components, several handwritten pages in deep blue ink. Every item was a piece of countless sleepless nights. Every item carried a part of her soul. Maya knelt to gather them, her hands unusually calm. But inside her a wave was rising. Not anger, not humiliation, but the exhaustion of someone who had faced too many judging eyes and too many doors slammed shut simply because of her skin. A few meters away, Ethan Miller, a 45-year-old white investor, stood frozen. He had just watched a flight attendant kick that suitcase as if she were kicking someone's right to exist. He saw Maya's expression when she bent down, steady but cracking at the edges. A woman who didn't scream, didn't lash out yet, whose shoulders trembled just slightly. Enough to tell him that this moment hurt her more deeply than any physical kick. He swallowed the surge of anger rising in his chest. "This isn't right," he whispered to himself. Heather folded her arms again, as if waiting for applause. Her mind was full of toxic satisfaction, the kind of triumphant feeling people experience when they believe they are above others. Disdain sharpened her eyes as she watched Maya pick up her papers. What was she thinking? Finally taught her where she belongs. That confident posture annoyed me the moment she walked in. Look at that fancy outfit, it's obviously not hers. Heather had no idea she was digging her own grave and stepping into it. From a distance, the announcement played, "Summit Air Flight 903 to Seattle will begin first-class boarding in a few minutes." The familiar airport sounds, the loudspeaker suitcase wheels rolling, rushed phone calls, suddenly became background noise for an unbearably heavy scene. No one stepped forward. No one dared raise their voice. Gate F-12 held nothing but the soft rustling of Maya's papers. When she reached for the larger prototype device, a small silver-grey metal box, her fingers trembled. Not from fear, but because she knew the weight this box carried. Not monetary value, but the trust of dozens of engineers who had placed their hopes in it. In that moment, Maya's mind expanded beyond her body. She heard her heartbeat, steady, strong, but deep. She felt every gaze behind her. She sensed every unspoken question. Why is this happening? Why is that woman being treated like this? What did she do wrong? Maya tightened her grip on the box and stood up. When she lifted her head, her eyes no longer held a tremor. Only a quiet, resolute strength that made the air turn cold. Behind her, 2 young airport employees whispered. She looked successful. Yeah, but Heather, you know how she is. I thought she was just difficult. I didn't know she was like this. A middle-aged woman shook her head. That flight attendant made a mistake. A big one. When Maya finished picking up her belongings and zipped her suitcase, closed, the sharp sound of the zipper felt like an answer. She looked at Heather. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. In Maya's eyes, Heather saw something that made her flinch. A solid kind of confidence. A quiet power. Something far bigger than this flight or Gate F-12. People like Heather always assumed they knew who had power and who didn't. But this time she was wrong. Completely wrong. From deep within the crowd, Ethan Miller took half a step forward. He didn't know Maya, but he felt he was witnessing the beginning of something far larger than anyone realized. Not just a flight about to be affected. Not just one flight attendant in trouble. Not just a suitcase being kicked. This was the hinge of a story the whole country would talk about in a few hours. And Ethan felt it clearly. The woman being humiliated, underestimated, treated as unworthy was not ordinary. Something in her posture, her calm, her refusal to react with rage hinted at something else. Something only truly powerful people possess. Ethan watched her for one more second and knew. She was not someone to underestimate. No one at Gate F-12 knew that. No one except Maya Collins herself. And in just a few minutes, everyone would understand. One kick to a suitcase. One public humiliation. One irreversible mistake. What was coming next would not be a reaction. It would be the consequence. A consequence for those who believed power lived in a uniform, and a lesson for those who dared insult someone they had no idea they were standing against. Maya stood in the middle of Gate F-12, her breathing slowly evening out as she pulled the dented suitcase closer to her leg. The scent of coffee drifted from a nearby counter, but it couldn't overpower the tension spreading through every inch of the air. People's eyes stayed fixed on her, stunned and curious. But Maya had long trained herself to detach from such stares. She closed her eyes for 1 second, just one, then opened them again with the calm of someone who had learned to survive in the center of storms. She stepped a few paces to the side, moving out of the flow of passengers under airport staff guidance. Despite being insulted by a flight attendant, having her suitcase kicked, being treated like a fraud, Maya still carried herself with immaculate composure. But inside, layers of emotion collided: the sting, the disappointment, and a deep exhaustion that was impossible to express exhaustion from having to justify her own existence again and again. She remembered the morning when she left the Collins Aerotech office, emails from the board meeting schedules with tech partners, the test reports for the next generation collision alert system. She remembered the whiteboard in the conference room, the arrows linking diagrams together toward one final goal, the collaborative project she had poured 3 years of her youth into. The meeting in Seattle wasn't just another meeting. It was the final milestone of a journey so long it sometimes made her forget herself. Today's flight should have been just a small step, but Heather had turned it into another test. A test of patience, of dignity, of how much contempt she was willing to endure before pushing back. Maya's phone lit up and buzzed. A message from the VP of Engineering read, "The new sensor prototype is ready for presentation. Hoping you can arrive soon." Maya inhaled, gripping the phone. She couldn't allow this foolish incident to interfere with something more important. But she also couldn't ignore what had happened. Not just because it insulted her, but because she knew if this had happened to someone without status, they would have no voice at all. That truth dimmed Maya's eyes. In the distance, Heather leaned against the aircraft door, looking annoyed, as if she were the one being inconvenienced. Two passengers whispered, glancing at Maya and then back at Heather. There was something uneasy in their eyes, as if they sensed the quiet fire rising inside Maya and weren't sure whether they were witnessing the beginning of something bigger. Maya bent down again, brushing her hand across the suitcase. It was more than luggage. It was a symbol of the journey she had spent 20 years building. From an intern in a data analysis room to leading a multi-million-dollar aviation technology company, this suitcase had traveled with her through Tokyo, Stockholm, San Jose, Zurich. It had been under countless first-class seats during tense negotiations, and today it had been kicked like trash. Maya straightened her collar and allowed herself a thin smile. Her calm wasn't fake. It was armor she had forged at 20 years old when a partner suggested she bring the real boss into a meeting. It was the stone shell she wore when people mistook her for an assistant instead of the lead. It was her only weapon in a world full of people like Heather. A line of passengers began forming for boarding. Maya slipped into the flow quiet, as a shadow, but every step firmer than a few minutes before. She could feel Heather's gaze stabbing into her back like needles trying to predict her reaction. Maya didn't look back, but she thought, "You have no idea who you just provoked." An elderly man in line around 70, silver-haired with sharp eyes, leaned toward Maya and whispered, "You didn't deserve that. Don't let her shake you." The faint scent of peppermint from the candy in his hand brought a strange sense of peace into the chaos. Maya nodded gratefully, and for a moment her shoulders felt lighter. At the aircraft door, Heather blocked her path, her eyes cold. "I hope you're not bringing a disruptive attitude onto the plane. First class is not a place to show off." This time, Maya looked straight into her eyes. "You're that concerned about me?" Maya said slowly, her voice low, steady, but sharp enough to make Heather freeze. In that moment, something small but very real shifted. Heather's smug smile vanished. She didn't know why. She only felt that something was wrong. Perhaps it was the look in Maya's eyes that did not tremble like the victims Heather was used to belittling. Eyes that belonged to someone who didn't need to reveal her status for others to sense her authority. Maya handed over her boarding pass. Heather took it, but her fingers trembled slightly. No one but Maya noticed. But Maya saw everything. The instinct of someone who had needed to analyze every tiny detail to survive in a cutthroat industry. "Seat 2A, Maya reminded her. Heather glanced down, bit her lip, then returned the pass. "Go ahead." No one knew it yet, but that moment marked the beginning of the countdown in Heather's career. She had just opened the door to the biggest mistake she would ever make. And Maya, though she had no plan to retaliate, yet had just stepped into the place where the truth would begin to unfold. She walked into the aircraft cabin, head-high eyes steady. Outside, Heather watched her go, a strange unease rising in her chest, a feeling that she had underestimated the wrong person, and that mistake would cost her. Heather stood at the cabin entrance, like a self-appointed gatekeeper, checking each boarding pass with her usual simmering irritation. But the moment Maya vanished behind the first-class divider, a thin thread of unease tightened quietly around Heather's chest. She shook her head hard, convincing herself it was just because Maya had been putting on an attitude. Someone who walked confidently dressed elegantly, but not in the right way, always triggered Heather's instinctive annoyance. As Heather turned away, She had no idea that every step Maya took inside the cabin was laying the foundation for an inevitable reckoning. In the forward rows, new employee Emily Park was arranging napkins and checking the wine glasses. Every movement was quick but tense. This was only her second month at the airline. One wrong move, and Heather could snap at her in front of the whole cabin. She had already seen it happen twice this week. Emily wanted to do well. She always wanted to do well. But whenever Heather was near, her hands trembled faintly, as if her instincts were warning her to keep her distance. She looked up just as Maya entered first class. The way Maya walked, slow, controlled spine, straight gaze, steady, made Emily pause for several seconds. She had never seen a first-class passenger enter, without glancing around, without awe, without hesitation. This woman walked as if she had belonged here for years. Emily forced a polite smile. "Welcome aboard." Maya nodded her eyes, gentle but distant, as if she carried a quiet storm behind them. She lifted her suitcase onto the seat, adjusting the luggage tag that Heather had knocked crooked. It was a tiny gesture, yet it carried the dignity of someone who had endured a lifetime of being pushed aside and had no intention of letting anyone step further. Emily watched her for a moment, a soft ache blooming in her chest. Not pity, but the realization that Maya looked like someone who had survived countless invisible wounds and still stood tall. Meanwhile, at the aircraft door, Heather continued greeting passengers with a strained, performative smile. The unease inside her grew stronger, like she had been challenged, as if Maya had seen straight through her in that last moment. Heather had never liked people with eyes like that, eyes that did not fear cheap authority. She straightened her scarf, trying to reclaim control. Just a black woman, lucky enough to be in first class, she muttered, comforting herself with a familiar prejudice. Nothing special. And that was the thought that would bury her. Inside the cabin, Maya settled into seat 2A. She exhaled slowly. The soft leather cushioned her back tight from weeks of non-stop work. She closed her eyes for half a second, letting the surrounding sounds brush over her mind, the rolling wheels of Suitcase's paper, rustling someone opening a laptop. But the images from 10 minutes earlier, replayed like a film in reverse, Heather's heel, the kick, the suitcase, snapping open the faces, watching half shocked, half expectant. Some had shown sympathy. Some had looked at her as if such disrespect was normal. Worse were the ones who saw it as accidental entertainment. Maya opened her eyes. No tears. Never. She had abandoned the habit of crying over insults at 17, but deep in her chest, a line had begun to crack. In seat 1B, Ethan Miller looked up from his newspaper when he saw her. His eyes held something like an apology on behalf of all the people who had stayed silent. Maya dipped her head gently. Her silent answer was clear. "I am fine." Ethan turned back to his paper, but could no longer read. His thoughts whispered, "Something is very wrong here. And I've just seen a small piece of it." In the cockpit, Captain Robert Jennings was reviewing the passenger list. When his eyes paused on the name Maya Collins, it rang faintly familiar. He could not place it, but something about that name reminded him of an aviation article he had skimmed recently. Something about a new safety technology. Something about a conference he watched for a few minutes. But he could not remember the face. He folded the list, unaware that the woman in seat 2A was the same person whose technology just months from now would save his entire crew from a catastrophic accident. That future lay hidden in the shadows, but his 20 years of reading people stirred with a faint warning, the feeling before a storm. Heather walked into first class. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Passengers who had been speaking softly went silent. No one liked her passive-aggressive hostility, but most avoided trouble by staying quiet. Her gaze slid across the seats. When she locked onto Maya, her thin smirk returned the smirk of someone who believed she held the upper hand. Maya did not look back. She opened her documents, letting her mind cling to something other than the insult. Heather stepped closer, her voice low but loud enough for Maya to hear. "Don't make noise, don't cause trouble, and don't expect special treatment. We've had enough people trying to climb their way into this cabin." A flash of icy sharpness flickered across Maya's eyes. She lifted her gaze, slowly, very slowly. "Climb their way?" Maya asked, her voice, low, calm, but weighted. Heather scoffed. "You know what I mean." The cabin fell completely silent, not because they were whispering, but because something was forming a first crack in the wall of Heather's false confidence. She had no idea why one look from Maya made her swallow hard. Maya said nothing else. She turned back to her documents, but her breathing had changed. It carried determination, not the determination to retaliate, but the determination to make sure this never happened to someone else again. A passenger in row 3 watched from afar. She couldn't hear the words, but she could feel the atmosphere shift. Maya's eyes, they carried weight, as if she had just witnessed the first sign of a storm that Heather had no clue was coming. She thought, this is the kind of woman the world cannot break easily. Outside the window, a metal bird waited to take off. But inside the cabin, 2 people, one wielding fake authority, the other possessing real power, concealed beneath silence, were about to begin a confrontation that would change the entire airline. Maya lowered her eyes to her documents once more. Heather turned away, believing she had won. But neither of them knew that the page Maya was reading contained the design for the safety system Summit Air was preparing to purchase for $500 million. One person was stepping closer to a career downfall. The other was stepping closer to the truth. And with just one more word, one more action, everything would explode. "Would you like me to continue with part 4? Maya placed the stack of documents back onto the small table in front of her seat, but she did not read another word. Her mind had begun drifting in a different direction, one she never expected when she walked into the airport that morning. It wasn't about the insult. It wasn't about the suitcase being kicked. It was the unmistakable realization that this wasn't aimed solely at her. It was part of a system. She felt it in the silent stairs outside gate F12, in Emily's trembling hands, in the hesitant kindness of the old man who comforted her, in the sighs of witnesses who could only watch, all of it pressed against Maya's chest like a heavy stone. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds around her fade. But just then, Heather stepped into the cabin, dragging a cold current behind her. Not the temperature, but the sharpness of prejudice wrapped in a clean uniform. Heather stopped at seat 1A under the pretense of checking the overhead bin, but her eyes kept flicking toward Maya, waiting for a reaction, an outburst, a complaint, anything she could weaponize. Maya gave her nothing. Heather grew more irritated. "Are you all right?" Emily whispered, as she passed Maya, pretending to check the seat pocket. Maya gave a faint nod, but Emily understood that nod wasn't. "I'm all right." It was, "You don't have to worry about me." Heather noticed the exchange. Her eyelid twitched. She hated interactions like that, people communicating through subtlety, through understanding she could never touch. If she causes trouble, let me know, Heather told Emily, lowering her voice, but still loud enough for Maya to hear. People like that love making a scene. Emily stepped back, flustered, unable to respond. Maya heard everything. Her chest tightened, but her face remained calm. She had grown used to people like Heather, using phrases like "people like that" to label others, used to toxic whispers, disguised as accidents, used to judgmental looks based on skin color before competence. Her hand clenched not out of anger, but because she realized this couldn't continue. Ethan leaned slightly from seat 1B, catching Maya's expression. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hurt. It was the look of someone quietly forming a decision to do what was right. He was about to speak, but Heather circled back, forcing him into silence. She hovered in the cabin like a shadow that followed every movement. Maya opened her laptop to focus on her presentation for the Seattle meeting, but her fingers froze above the keys. The earlier incident replayed in her mind, slow and distorted, like a stuck film reel. She always taught her team the standards she believed in: transparency, human respect, safety. But if she stayed silent now just to keep the flight peaceful, wouldn't she be betraying her own principles? The exhaustion inside her shifted into a thin line of resolve. Heather continued pacing the cabin, as if performing a role called person with authority. Every step pushed the situation closer to its breaking point. A man in row 3 frowned at her. A young woman typed something into her phone. A college student whispered to his friend, "Record this. I feel something big is coming." No one said it out loud, but everyone sensed it. Maya's silence was not surrender. It felt like the final calm before another door opened. Emily returned to check the cabin again. As she passed Maya, she stopped, leaned down, pretending to fix the seatbelt, really just to shield her voice. "If you want to report what happened, I'll confirm it," she whispered, barely audible but clear enough. Maya looked up. For the first time, her eyes softened. Not with weakness, with gratitude for the bravery of someone young, someone frightened of losing her job yet still willing to stand with the truth. She responded just as softly. "Thank you." One simple word, but it made Emily straighten her back, as if she had just been given strength. Heather watched from afar, unable to hear the exchange, but the shift in atmosphere irritated her like a wrong frequency. She turned sharply, lips pressed tight. Maya closed her eyes for one more second, this time not to suppress emotion, but to prepare. She opened them again. Deep inside, the calm had turned to fire. Everything changed from this moment. She would not stay silent. She would not let it slide. Not just for herself, but for those who had endured this with no voice to defend them. Heather still had no idea she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and every action, every smirk, every word was a stone, pushing her closer to the brink. A brink no one could pull her back from. Not when Maya Collins, underestimated, insulted, but holding real power, was preparing to rise. The first-class door opened once more as the crew prepared to complete boarding. And in that moment, Maya made her decision. This would not end quietly. Not today. Not with her. The air in first class grew thick as passengers continued boarding. Everyone could sense something simmering beneath the surface, like a spark hovering near a fuel tank. Heather stood at the end of the cabin, supervising each person as if she owned the entire plane. But her eyes never left Maya. She found Maya's silence too calm, too steady, and that bothered her more than any form of resistance ever could. Maya adjusted her seatbelt, her hand resting lightly on the dented suitcase by her feet. The bent corner reminded her of every second that had happened at Gate F-12, not to feed anger, but to remember, to turn it into purpose, to never forget why she needed to speak up. Emily entered the cabin for a final check. Her eyes met Maya's, showing a flicker of worry. Maya responded with a soft nod, a nod meant to reassure, and it worked. It wasn't the look of someone about to explode. It was the look of someone preparing to do the right thing. The intercom chimed, announcing preparations to close the doors. Some passengers reached for headphones, others opened laptops. Heather walked up to Maya, tilting her head with that familiar, abrasive smile. "Make sure your luggage is tucked in properly," Heather said, lowering her voice, but keeping the criticism sharp. "We don't want anyone putting first class at risk." Maya lifted her chin. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a warning. "I've never put anyone at risk. But you did, back at Gate F-12. Heather raised an eyebrow, trying to swallow the momentary flash of panic. "If you want to report something, go ahead. No one will believe you anyway." "People like you." Her sentence was cut clean in half. "I believe her." Ethan stood from seat 1B and stepped forward. His voice was low, firm, and unmistakably clear. "I saw the entire thing, and I'm prepared to say so to anyone who asks." The cabin froze. Heather snapped toward Ethan. "You're just being manipulated. People like her always make people like her." Ethan repeated, emphasizing each word. "You might want to think very carefully before you finish that sentence." An older woman in row 3 raised her phone. "I saw everything. I recorded it. If evidence is needed, I'll send it." Then more voices echoed from around the cabin. "I have a video too. I heard everything she said. The way you kicked that suitcase, completely unacceptable." Maya looked around her chest, tightening not from pain, but from something rare, the feeling of being in a space where strangers were willing to defend the truth. Heather stepped back, color draining from her face. She wasn't used to being challenged. She wasn't used to being exposed. She wasn't used to losing control. But the worst part hadn't happened yet. A small item suddenly fell from an overhead bin, not from turbulence, but because Heather had jerked away too quickly and pulled the door off balance. The soft clatter made several passengers flinch. Maya tilted her head, her gaze now sharper than calm, sharp enough to slice straight into Heather's composure. "You think you're controlling the situation?" Maya said quietly. "But you lost control the moment you kicked my suitcase." Emily stood nearby, hands clenched tight. She wanted to speak, but feared Heather's retaliation. Then a sudden burst of courage slipped out. "If management asks, I'll tell the truth." Heather whipped around, eyes wide, like she was staring at a traitor. "You do that, and you'll destroy your career." Emily trembled, but did not back down. "If I have to choose between my career and my conscience, I choose my conscience." A wave of murmurs rippled through the cabin like rolling water. Maya could hear Emily's heartbeat pounding. She saw her hands shaking. But she also saw something greater than fear, courage born from injustice. Maya rested her hand on the armrest, leaning slightly toward Emily, her voice low and warm. "Thank you." Heather looked at the two of them, the sense of isolation beginning to swallow her whole. She glanced at Ethan, then at the surrounding passengers. Every face showed the same emotion, disappointment, anger, and refusal to tolerate her behavior. And then Heather made another mistake. She stepped forward, raising her voice to overpower everyone. "If you all keep this up, I'll call security," and Ethan cut in. "You don't have the authority to threaten us. If anyone should be facing security..." It's you. A silence stretched tight through the cabin like a drawn bowstring. Maya leaned back in her seat, not joining the argument. She didn't have to. The truth was rising on its own. Fear flashed in Heather's eyes. For the first time in 8 years as a flight attendant, she could feel her grip on power slipping away entirely. And Maya knew this moment was only the beginning. She had not filed a complaint. She had not shown a video. But everything was already shifting in a direction Heather couldn't stop. Not because Maya was angry, but because Maya was a woman who didn't break under insult. And when someone like that stands up, an entire system begins to shake. Heather stood in the aisle like a flickering warning light, completely losing the composure she usually tried to project. She looked around and saw the passengers' eyes locking onto her, no longer hesitant, no longer afraid of inconvenience, but filled with rising anger. Maya didn't need to say a single word. She simply sat still, yet that calmness pulled Heather into an invisible panic she could no longer disguise. A ground staff member stepped into the cabin to deliver the final checklist before closing the doors. When she noticed Heather's tense expression and the atmosphere inside the cabin, she paused. "Is everything all right?" she asked cautiously. Heather gave a stiff nod, though her voice trembled. "Everything's fine. We just have one passenger causing trouble." That sentence dropped like a match into a room full of gas. Ethan shot up from his seat, unable to hold back anymore. "She's not causing trouble. You are." A woman in row 3 lifted her phone straight at Heather. "I filmed everything from the moment you kicked her suitcase. Do you want to be exposed?" Instead, Heather stepped back, her face flushing. She had never been pushed this far by passengers before. She turned toward Maya, as if trying to reclaim power by exerting authority over her. "You stand up," Heather snapped. "I need to recheck your ticket immediately. Suspicious passengers must be verified." Her voice carried the edge of unraveling. Maya rose at a steady, deliberate pace. Inside her chest was the exhaustion, built from years of being mistaken for an assistant, being stopped by security, at conferences being addressed with the wrong title, even when her name was printed on the slides. But today she was not standing just for herself. She handed her boarding pass to Heather without breaking eye contact. The stare lingered a beat, then one more. Heather took it, her hand trembling. She looked at the paper, then tried to raise her voice to reclaim dominance. "I've said it already. Some people don't understand their limits." A woman in row 2 shook her head and spoke loudly. "The only limit here is your lack of respect." A man in row 4 added, "You're delaying our flight because of your personal bias." Heather spun around to respond, but at that exact moment, a blue uniform appeared at the front of the cabin. 2 airport security officers stepped in. Daniel Ruiz walked first, tall, steady, with a calm expression that couldn't be manipulated by theatrics. Behind him was Malik Turner, observing everything with the sharp eyes of someone who had handled hundreds of real disturbances and had seen many false ones too. The cabin fell silent, as if someone had muted every sound. Heather inhaled sharply and rushed toward them. "Thank you for coming so quickly. We have a passenger." Daniel raised a hand, gently cutting her off. "We received the report, but we will conduct our own assessment." He turned first to Maya. He did not look at Heather. He did not take her word as truth. He looked at the person being accused. "Ma'am, may I see your identification, please?" His voice was calm and neutral, no bias, no assumption. It was the tone of someone who understood that truth must be observed, not inherited, from the loudest voice in the room. Maya opened her wallet, took out her ID, and handed it to him. Daniel checked it quickly but thoroughly, then reviewed her boarding pass. Everything was correct. Not a single mismatch. Behind him, Heather's expression flickered with desperate hope, as if praying for a flaw to appear. "See, do you see Heather cut in? She's suspicious. Daniel turned sharply to her. "Ms. Lawson, I have not asked for your input. Just one sentence, but it landed like a barricade slamming down." Passengers murmured in agreement. Heather's face lost color. Malik completed his verification using his tablet and then said, "All documents are valid. Name matches. Boarding pass authentic. No signs of fraud." Maya stood straight, no need to gloat. The truth was speaking for her. Ethan murmured, "Finally someone willing to look at facts." Heather clenched her jaw. "Suspicion isn't in the documents, it's in her attitude." And the older woman in row 3 stood up abruptly, raising her phone. Here is the attitude you're talking about. You kicked her suitcase and called her trash. I recorded everything." Emily stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. "Officers, none of what she said is true. I was there from the beginning. Ms. Collins didn't do anything wrong. It was the final hit to the wall Heather was desperately trying to hold up." Heather turned toward Emily, eyes filled with panic and spite. "You're betraying me." Emily didn't back down this time. "I'm telling the truth." The air tightened. A strange stillness settled like the quiet center of a storm. Maya looked at Emily, at Daniel, at the passengers who had spoken up, and the heaviness in her chest shifted into something else. Something like hope. Heather glanced around, realizing she no longer controlled anything. She swallowed hard, searching for an escape. But Daniel spoke with measured authority. "We will need to review the videos and passenger statements. From this point forward, I advise you not to make further comments." No one said it out loud, but every single person understood the same thing. Heather had reached the edge, and from here there was only one direction left to fall. Daniel asked each nearby passenger to hand over their phones so he could review the videos. Screens lit up one after another, capturing every detail of Heather's behavior, the forceful kick, the insult, the disdain in her eyes. Everything became clear, sharp, undeniable. Heather stared at those images as if she were watching her own sentence being read aloud. Every frame sliced into the fake confidence she had worn for 8 years as a flight attendant. Malik leaned in from the side, reviewing clips from multiple angles. When the words "ghetto trash" echoed from the third recording, he lifted his head, his expression shifting into the unmistakable darkness of someone who had lost all patience for abuse of authority. Daniel stepped toward Maya and said in a firm, steady tone, "Ma'am, we confirm you have done nothing wrong. Your journey will not be interrupted. You may return to your seat." Maya nodded, but there was no satisfaction in her eyes, only sadness and clarity. Not because she wanted to forgive, but because she understood this wasn't just about her. Heather looked around the cabin, desperately searching for even one ally. But everywhere she turned, she met eyes filled with reproach. Ethan watched her with folded arms, unflinching. The older woman in row 3 stood ready with her phone, willing to record more if needed. Several other passengers stayed silent, but no longer looked intimidated, showing Heather she had lost the ability to twist the situation. At that moment, Captain Jennings stepped out of the cockpit. His face tightened when he saw the 2 officers. He scanned the cabin, then locked eyes with Heather. Within seconds, he understood this had escalated far beyond a stressed-out attendant. This was now an official incident. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice deep and heavy. Daniel handed him the tablet. Jennings watched several clips, and each time Heather's kick replayed, his expression hardened. When the racial slur played, he looked up, every trace of emotion compressed into deep disappointment. He faced Heather. "Explain yourself." His voice held no anger, but the disappointment was the kind that every professional recognized immediately, the tone of someone about to deliver a decision. Heather struggled to stay composed. Captain I was only protecting the security of first class. She had suspicious behavior. "I stop Jennings, cut in." "I watched the videos. The only suspicious thing here is the way you treated a passenger like an enemy." Heather swallowed, taking a half step forward. "Captain, I didn't know who she was. The problem," Jennings said slowly, "is that you believe you need to know who someone is before treating them with basic respect." The boarding announcements had paused. The usual sounds of the cabin, the rustle of newspapers, the click of seat belts, the shuffle of shoes, all faded into silence. No one looked away. Emily stood behind them, gripping her checklist until her knuckles turned white. But for the first time since her shift began, she stood tall, no trembling left. Her eyes met Jennings, carrying an unspoken message. "Thank you for seeing what we were afraid to say." Jennings glanced around the cabin, then told Daniel, "Thank you. We'll take it from here." Daniel nodded, and both officers stepped back, transferring authority to the captain. Jennings turned to Heather. His voice sharpened, now fully authoritative. "Miss Lawson, hand over your badge and employee ID. Immediately." Heather froze like she had been struck. "Captain, no you can't. I've been here 8 years." "And in 8 years, what have you learned?" Jennings asked, never raising his voice, but hitting each word with precision. "I see someone who abused her authority, harmed a passenger, and put the airline's reputation at risk." Heather stepped back, as if the cabin floor was slipping beneath her. "It was just one moment of losing control. I didn't mean you kicked a passenger's belongings. You used a racial insult. You fabricated a security concern. That was not losing control. That was intentional misconduct." A soft thud came from the back row as someone dropped an item, the tension too much to hold. Jennings extended his hand, palm open, waiting for the badge. No one spoke. No one breathed deeply. Heather looked at the badge, once her pride. Her eyes reddened. Her hands trembled as she unclipped it from her uniform. Emily turned away, unable to watch the moment, torn between human sympathy and the necessity of accountability. Heather placed the badge into the captain's hand. Jennings took it, the weight heavy with 8 years of her history. "You are suspended immediately," he said. "You will leave the aircraft under security escort." Heather looked around, hoping someone would defend her. But every gaze shifted away. When Daniel returned to escort her, Heather turned toward Maya, her voice cracking. You ruined me." Maya replied in a calm so steady it stopped Heather cold. "No, you ruined yourself." Maya sat down again, her eyes still deep and steady, like undisturbed water. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. Part of her felt sorrow for Heather, but another part understood that no change ever happens unless wrongdoing is confronted. Heather was escorted out of the cabin, and the aircraft door closed behind her. No whispers. No applause. Only the heavy silence of a group that had witnessed something necessary. And for the first time since morning, Maya inhaled a true, steady breath. The storm wasn't over, but it had changed direction. Captain Jennings returned to the cockpit for a few minutes, but the tension Heather left behind still hung in the cabin like a thin mist. No one spoke yet. Passengers kept glancing at the empty spot where Heather had stood. Maya could feel the air shift around her, as if everyone in first class was waiting for the next impact, without knowing where it would come from. She leaned back and tried to focus on the documents for her meeting in Seattle. But before she could open the first page, her phone vibrated sharply. The screen lit up with a message that made her heart pause for half a beat. Summit Air Emergency Operations Office. This was not a routine call. She knew why, and she understood that the video had spread far too quickly. The sound of her phone buzzing was heard across nearby rows. Ethan glanced over. Emily watched from a distance, concern tightening her face. No one said anything, but everyone silently sensed that the situation had escalated beyond the cabin. Maya inhaled, then answered. Collins speaking. The voice on the other end was tense. Maya, we're receiving reports about an incident on Flight 903. The video has already surfaced on the crew network. The CEO wants to confirm your status. We need to know, are you safe? Maya responded steadily. I'm fine. But the attendant's behavior was unacceptable. The voice grew quieter, like someone trying to hide panic. This has reached the board. There is a possibility the situation will be treated as a systemic failure. Maya looked out the window. Sunlight reflected across her face, giving her a calm appearance that didn't match the weight building inside. Handle it properly, she said. I'll speak when I land in Seattle. She ended the call. The cabin was still silent, but those seated closest to 2A had heard enough to gauge the seriousness. A young passenger whispered, "That sounded like a very high-level call." Someone beside him replied softly, "I don't think she's just some random passenger." Maya didn't turn around or offer any hint about who she truly was, but her silence only deepened their suspicions. Emily approached Maya, leaning slightly in respect. "Mom, I'm truly sorry for everything that happened. You didn't deserve any of it." Maya looked at the young woman, her gaze warmer than before. "It wasn't your fault. You did the right thing." Emily gave a fragile smile. "You know, a lot of us wanted to speak up. They were just afraid. Afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of Ms. Lawson noticing. But today I felt that if I stayed silent, I'd regret it forever." Maya saw the fragile courage in Emily's eyes, honest and trembling. She understood how important that was. "What's your name?" Maya asked. "Emily Park." "Thank you, Emily." Emily bowed her head and stepped back. But the strength Maya had just given her in those 2 short sentences lifted her shoulders noticeably. At that moment, the intercom chimed. Ping! Captain Jennings reappeared at the front of the cabin, but this time he didn't walk in with the same authority as before. His face looked heavier, as if he had just received bad news. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice dropping half an octave, "we've just been notified by Summit Air headquarters. The airline is requesting verification of all videos related to the earlier incident before we can depart." A wave of whispers broke out across the cabin. A man asked loudly, "Is this because of the attendant?" Jennings nodded slightly. "We need a few minutes to submit an official report." Maya closed her eyes. She knew this was coming, and she knew it would come fast. But even she hadn't expected the company to react this quickly. It wasn't just because of the video. Not just because of the discrimination. It was because of the contract. Ethan looked at her, his voice low, piecing together a bigger puzzle. "You're important to the airline, aren't you?" Maya didn't answer. but her silence once again was an answer in itself. While passengers murmured, Maya opened her laptop. The screen lit up on the slide she had left, unfinished Collins Aerotech, Next Generation, Flight Safety System Presentation to Summit Air Board, Seattle. From the row behind, a young man caught sight of the title through the seat gap. He froze, then whispered to his friend, "She's presenting a major deal to this airline." His friend asked, "How major?" He swallowed. "I'm not sure. But I saw Collins Aerotech listed in an article about a $500 million contract. Rumors spread like electricity. Row 4 whispered to Row 5, $500 million. Row 6 murmured, "She's not a regular passenger." Row 2 pieced it together. "She's a major partner of the airline." A new energy rippled through the cabin, no longer curiosity, but recognition taking shape. Jennings was speaking rapidly with the ground crew when he happened to see Maya's laptop screen. His eyes landed directly on the slide title. The color drained from his face. He whispered to the ground officer beside him, "I think we may have just made a serious mistake with someone the airline can't afford to lose." Maya didn't hear that, but she could feel the wave of realization spreading behind her. It wasn't observation anymore, it was understanding. She knew the game had shifted. The injustice she experienced was no longer confined to insults. It now touched the future of an entire airline and a contract that could redefine safety standards in aviation. Maya placed her hand on the tray table, feeling the pulse of the moment. The truth was moving forward, and no one, not even her, could stop it now. Maya closed her laptop as the whispers in the cabin began forming into recognizable pieces. No one looked at her as just a mistreated passenger anymore. They looked at her as a key figure whose identity had only partially surfaced, a truth laced with power. But Maya remained still, her hands folded, as if she were quietly waiting for another wave to break. And that wave came immediately. The intercom light clicked on as Captain Jennings returned to the front of the cabin. This time he wasn't alone. A ground operations officer followed closely behind him. Her expression tightened, as if she carried a message capable of shaking the entire flight. Jennings cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady, but unable to hide the caution beneath it. "Ladies and gentlemen, Summit Air Headquarters has requested that I verify additional information regarding the passenger in Seat 2A. This request comes directly from senior management." The cabin fell instantly silent. All eyes shifted toward Maya. Ethan glanced back at her lips parting, then closing again, as if he wanted to shield her from the staring. Emily, standing in the galley, clutched her checklist tighter, sensing the shift. What was unfolding was no longer just the exposure of wrongdoing. This was something bigger, far bigger. Jennings approached Maya. When he stood before her, the sternness of a veteran pilot softened into a respectful caution. "Ms. Collins," he said quietly, his voice low enough for only the nearest rows to hear, "I just received a direct call from the CEO of Summit Air. He wants confirmation of your safety immediately." A stunned murmur rippled through the cabin like sparks crawling across wire. Heather had been removed, but the shockwaves of her actions still vibrated in the air. Now, with Captain Jennings acknowledging that the CEO was monitoring the situation, everyone understood the woman sitting before them was no ordinary traveler. Maya replied softly, "I'm fine. Thank you for your concern." Jennings nodded, trying to mask the growing discomfort he felt. He has seen the video. The entire executive board is in an emergency meeting. The situation has been flagged at the highest priority. A young passenger whispered, "Highest priority." "What does that even mean?" someone next to him murmured. "It means their $500 million deal might be on the line." Maya didn't react, but the words still drifted into her mind, like pieces of a larger symphony forming around her. One part of her wanted to protect the company's image. Another part knew silence would only allow injustice to continue for someone else. Jennings tilted his head slightly. "If you need to speak privately with the CEO, I can make arrangements." The entire cabin froze. Maya exhaled and offered a faint smile. "I will call him after takeoff. The status of the flight is more important right now." A woman in row 3 shook her head, eyes wide. "I've never seen a captain ask a passenger for guidance before takeoff." Ethan turned again, staring at Maya with dawning understanding. "Who are you really?" Maya looked directly at him. Not arrogant, not boastful, simply speaking with the quiet transparency of someone who had carried authority long enough to never flaunt it. An engineer. Someone who works to keep every flight safe. But everyone in the cabin knew it was more than that. Emily looked at Maya, as if seeing the final piece of a puzzle, a piece so significant it made her shiver. Collins Aerotech develops airline safety systems. She is their representative. Maybe even more. Jennings turned toward the ground officer. "I need to send the report immediately. We must depart in the next few minutes." The ground officer leaned in and whispered, "Headquarters is waiting to confirm the identity of passenger 2A. If I'm interpreting correctly, they want to make sure she is the person they think she is." Jennings froze for a brief second. He looked at Maya, then spoke honestly. "They want to confirm whether you are truly Maya Collins of Collins Aerotech." At that moment, the cabin erupted like a string of fireworks. "It's really her," someone shouted. Another voice asked, "The one who designed the new alert system?" A man in the first row whispered, "My God, she holds the key to the $500 million contract." Emily covered her mouth, eyes widening. "I can't believe it. It's her." Maya didn't stand. She didn't explain. She let the truth settle on its own. Jennings took a step closer and lowered his voice. "I'm sorry. We treated a strategic partner as a suspicious passenger. Why?" He swallowed the humiliation. "Mr. Pierce, the CEO, is calling again." Maya didn't look at him like a victor. She looked at him like someone who understood the burden of leadership all too well. "You did nothing wrong," Maya said. "But your system did." Jennings exhaled, his shoulders sinking. "I know." The aircraft tilted slightly as the final door closed. The cabin seemed to hold a collective breath. And then Maya's phone vibrated again, harder than before. On the screen, Jonathan Pierce, CEO, Summit Air Emergency call. The entire cabin watched Maya with the stillness of an audience waiting for a verdict. Maya slid her finger across the screen to answer. "Hello, Mr. Pierce," she said calmly. "I'm on your flight." In that moment, everyone in the cabin understood. The real confrontation had just begun. Maya held the phone gently to her ear, while the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the voice on the other end. Jonathan Pierce's voice came through sharp tense, stripped of any corporate politeness. "Maya, I just watched the video. The entire executive board is here. I need to know exactly what happened." Maya stared straight ahead, her voice so calm that it made those seated nearby shiver. "You've seen it. Your employee attacked me without reason. But I'm not calling to blame anyone. I'm calling because this isn't about one individual." Pierce lowered his voice. "Are you hurt? I'm fine," Maya replied. "But the problem isn't the injury. It's the system that allows behavior like this to exist." Her words made Pierce fall silent for several beats. The cabin could clearly hear his tense breathing through the phone. "Maya, our contract, everything we've prepared, you know how important it is for both sides." "I know," Maya answered slowly. "But you also know I can't ignore this. Changing technology means nothing if you don't change the culture behind it." Jennings, standing nearby, bowed his head deeply, as if receiving the accusation on behalf of his entire crew. Pierce exhaled heavily. "I promise we will take decisive action. Lawson has already been suspended." "If you want, I don't want revenge," Maya cut in. "I want change." She could feel the trust of the entire cabin rising behind her like a silent wave. Ethan nodded faintly. Emily clasped her hands together, eyes bright with something close to hope. "I propose," Maya continued, her voice firm and weighted, "that Summit Air implement a mandatory behavior and conduct reform program across the entire system. No more box-ticking training sessions, no more covering things up. I want every employee to understand that safety is not only in the technology, but in how they treat their passengers." Pierce responded immediately. "I agree." Maya closed her eyes for a moment. "And we make it public, transparent. No blaming, no burying the truth." A long silence followed. Then Pierce spoke again, his voice lowered, as if finally facing a truth he could no longer dodge. "If that is what you require, Maya, it will be done." The entire cabin, moments ago, only accidental witnesses, now watched Maya like someone shifting the course of an entire airline. Pierce added, "When you land, a company vehicle will meet you. I want to speak with you in person." "I'll be there," Maya said. She ended the call. No one spoke for several seconds. Then the whispers began spreading. She just made the CEO promise a full reform, not a lawsuit. Real change. "This woman, she's more powerful than we thought." Emily stepped forward, standing tall before Maya. "Miss Collins, I want to thank you. I think today changed how I see this entire job." Maya gave her a soft smile. "You did the right thing." Jennings approached, bowing deeply to Maya, an act so rare that the cabin fell silent again. "On behalf of the entire crew, I apologize. And thank you for refusing to stay silent." Maya didn't need to answer. Her eyes said everything. "No one deserves to be treated the way I was. And we will fix this." The aircraft began to taxi. Light from the window washed across Maya's face, not the light of victory, but the light of a new beginning. She rested her hand on the dented suitcase beside her. There was no relief, no anger left. Only one truth remained. A single person who stands against injustice at the right moment can change the experience of millions. And today, Maya had done exactly that. From the perspective of an expert in organizational culture and power dynamics, the story of Maya Collins reveals an old and unchanging truth. Injustice rarely begins with grand actions, but with small moments when someone believes they have the right to define another person's worth through their own prejudice. Heather did not lose her career because she kicked a suitcase. She lost it long before that the day she believed her uniform granted her the authority to judge, and that a victim's silence was the same as acceptance. But Maya forced the system to confront its own shadows, not through anger, but through dignity. What matters is not that a CEO compelled an airline to reform. What matters is how a disrespected passenger transformed a humiliating moment into a stepping stone to raise standards for millions who will board planes after her. That is the power of standing up at the right time, in the right way, and for the right reason. If this story makes you reflect on respect, fairness, and the way we treat one another when no one is watching, then like the video to help spread this message even further. Subscribe to follow more stories that illuminate the hidden corners of the system. And before you go, comment 3 words. Respect comes first.